Okay, so right now, we're just going to settle in a bit. So, like always, we will start to tune into the breath. To begin with, at least, close your eyes, or you can leave them partially open, pointed maybe down towards the floor, someplace where you're not seeing a lot of objects in front of you, nothing to distract you, just a diffuse vision where everything becomes one panoramic whole of color and shape, not defined. And even if your eyes are closed, you can still have that same sort of panoramic awareness. Notice if, with your eyes closed, you have any sorts of colors or shapes appearing in the darkness. And just allow the focus to dissolve and become a diffuse awareness where your peripheral vision is taking up just as much of your attention as what's in the center of the visual field. Now, with that kind of relaxed, diffuse gaze, take a few deep breaths at your own pace. Like always, paying attention to the exhalation, making sure that it's longer than the inhalation. Ideally, even twice as long as the inhalation, but don't get too hung up on that. And if you notice that there's a natural settling after the exhalation, where there's a relaxed gap before the next inhalation begins, just allow that to be there. And notice in that relaxed gap if you can stay there for a moment or two or longer. If thoughts seem to quiet down a little bit, do you notice a lull in the constant chatter of mind? Continue taking a couple slow, deep breaths. And notice, if you can, in that lull, if on the inhalation, the mind revs back up again, do you notice with the inhalation a subtle feeling of energizing in the body, or a turning on of thought where it had quieted momentarily? You don't have to do anything with any of this. It's just something to notice and become aware of. Allow the breath to settle in just to a natural rhythm. It doesn't matter if it's fast or slow, deep or shallow. No judgment. The body knows how it needs to breathe. It's good to tune into the breath, though, because the breath can give us a lot of information about our emotional state. The more we become aware of our breath in times of sitting meditation, the more we can easily tune into breath when we're out living our lives. Sometimes emotions will creep up on us so fast that we're not even necessarily aware that we're experiencing an emotion. And if we do, we might just be inclined to label it and pass it off that I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling tired, I'm feeling at ease, without really tuning into the body to find out how we know that we are any of those things. What does that really mean in our experience? But what you'll notice when you get in tune with the breath is that our breathing changes when we're in these different states. If you're feeling anxious, you might find that you breathe very shallow. There's a lot of tension in the chest and the torso, and that the breath may come in only as deeply as the throat or the top of the chest. It may be rather shallow, it may be rather rapid. Again, this isn't a judgment of the breath, but it's an indication that when you're feeling something and you don't know what it is, or you're feeling an emotion and you are identified with it, just notice what's happening in the body and notice if the breathing has been changed. Notice if what is giving you the indication that you are feeling anxious is that you are having shallow, short breaths. And if you do want to work with the emotion, and if you are in some sort of a panic situation, taking control of those breaths and breathing more deeply into the torso and extending the exhalation longer than the inhalation will actually help to calm the nervous system. It will help bring calm to the mind. It will help diffuse that feeling of anxiety. Likewise, you might notice when you're feeling very calm that your breath is just naturally deep and soft, maybe very slow. You don't have to do anything, it's just natural. Our goal with all of these inquiry practices is to become very aware of what is happening in the body during all different times of the day, all different situations, and allow the insights that arise from that to help relieve the identification with emotional states, with trauma, with personal history and stories. When what was taken to be a very strong indication of who you are and how you are right now is seen to be nothing more than physical sensations in the body, a changed pattern of breathing, and perhaps some thoughts echoing certain sentiments or playing back memories. That structure that the self was built upon can begin to collapse. The structure of this ego identity can start to fall away. And though that sounds potentially scary, It doesn't need to be, because that illusion of self, that ego illusion, is the container for all of our fears and worries. It's the container for all of the most painful of our emotions, the most painful of our experiences. In fact, for the experience of pain itself. There's an old saying, no self, no problem. And it's very true. So right now, let's take a look at thoughts and the way in which we identify with them. So keeping your eyes either closed or in that relaxed, half-lidded position, allow the mind to do whatever the mind is going to do. You may notice thoughts in the form of speech. It might sound like your own voice. It might sound like somebody else's. It might be talking about your day or commenting on things that I've said, either making mental notes to remember later or arguing with it and saying that it makes no sense or all the reasons why I'm wrong. Perfectly okay, no matter what you hear. Just notice the experience of hearing a voice. Where is that voice appearing in your experience? Does your internal voice seem to be happening in the same space as all the external sounds that you can hear? Or does it feel like it's somehow more interior? Again, allow the mind to just do what it wants, say whatever it says, and just pay attention to what's being heard. Not so much the content of what's being heard, but the actual sound of the internal voice, where it's appearing, how loud it is. And again, notice if it feels synonymous with what you consider yourself to be. Do you feel identified with that voice? Like you are the one speaking the words, or that the words are talking about you, the real you, or that the words are correct. The words are speaking a truth that you believe. Notice all of this and any other way that that voice shows itself to your experience. Do you feel like you are caught on those thoughts? Like one leads to another, to another, to another, and you're an unwitting passenger on that train of thought? Can you get the sense of being an external witness of those thoughts? Do they feel like you are hearing them, but that you're not quite sure how you are thinking them or where they're coming from? So staying open to any thoughts that appear. In this case, we're talking mostly about auditory thoughts, the sounds in your head. See if you can guess what the next thought is that you are going to hear. Do you have any way of knowing what the next sound is that you are going to hear from inside your head? If that internal voice is you, shouldn't you be able to know exactly what the next thing is that you're going to say? If you can't accurately tell what your next thought is going to be, what does that tell you about the nature of thought? Is it really something under your control? If you had the power to control your thinking, if you could choose the thoughts, would you ever experience anything but pleasant, happy thoughts? Would you ever think self-critical thoughts? Would you ever ruminate about past decisions or things that you said to other people but now regret, or that other people did to you? Still staying with the auditory field, can you tell exactly where those thoughts are coming from? Where do they seem to be arising out of? Does it feel like they emerge from some sort of empty space? Do they emerge fully formed, or do they sort of fade in? And in the moments when the thought is being heard, can you tell, is there a hearer of those thoughts? Who is it who seems to be hearing those words inside the head? When looking for this hearer, you might want to check your physical sensations in the body and mental overlays in the form of bodily images or some other type of visual image that seems to be attesting to a separate being who is able to hear sounds generated internally by the mind. Be very curious about the experience and see if any of those images or bodily sensations actually indicate the existence of a true self, a true witness, a true hearer. Now, staying with those internal sounds, notice when they fade away, where do they go? When a sound thought disappears, is it abrupt? And does it dissolve? And regardless of how it disappears, notice where the thought disappears to. What is that seemingly empty space into which the thought dissolves? If you are identifying with that thought and the thought dissolves and disappears into this unknowable mystery space, Do you dissolve along with it? If thoughts can be heard, if thoughts arise and fall away without your willfully engaging them, if thoughts appear without you knowing what the next thought is going to be, and then disappear all on its own without you telling the thought to go anywhere, what does that indicate about your connection with that thought? How can that thought be any more you than a bird flying through the sky, or a stranger passing on the street? When you walk on a busy street, you don't identify yourself as every person who passes by or every dog you see being walked, or every bird flying by in the sky or landing on a branch. And yet, we tend to take that approach with every thought, not only believing them, but believing them to be our doing, a reflection of who we are. And in some cases, the identification is so strong that we are our thoughts. We are synonymous with the thinking in the head. So using direct experience to actually observe what the process of hearing a thought entails, it allows us to create that space and recognize that we are not the thoughts. We are not in control of the thoughts. Thoughts simply arise of their own accord and disappear again, all in their own time. So now let's look at visual thoughts. This whole time you've probably also had visual imagery coming and going, but we've been focused primarily on the sounds of your own internal mental chatter. But now notice how visual thoughts appear. If it helps, perhaps try to picture an apple right now. What color is that apple? Does it have a stem? Does it have a leaf? Is it floating in the air? Or is it in your hand? Is it resting on a table? Or perhaps hanging from a tree? Did your internal experience change with every suggestion you heard? Did you experience different visual thoughts? If so, where in your experience did they appear? Do they seem to appear in the same place as your external visual experience? Your ability to visualize is actually different from person to person. So for some people, those who have aphantasia, it's physically impossible for them to actually visualize something. And then the spectrum runs all the way to those for whom simply imagining an apple puts it in the same three-dimensional visual space as every other seemingly solid object in their room. So with eyes open, they can see an apple, even though they can't touch it or smell it or taste it. Most of us are somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, give or take. The degree to which you can successfully visualize an object is not the point of this exercise. It's to be aware of our visual thoughts and where they manifest in our experience. So letting go of any sort of sensation of control, just allow the mind to do what it's going to do. And notice any visual imagery that pops up. It might be a memory, it might be a projection of the future or a potential future. You might be half dozing and having surreal, hypnagogic mini dreams. You might be picturing my face when you hear these words. You might be hearing noises outside and picturing the potential people or cars or airplanes or birds who are making those sounds. The content doesn't matter. Just notice what it's like to see visual imagery in the mind. Does it seem to be more interior than the things which appear with your eyes open in the room around you? Does it seem to be something that is unique and personal to you? It is somehow inside your experience. If so, just get a feel for how that is known. If seeing a thought in the mind seems to be internal, check your experience and see if you have perhaps another mental overlay, which is almost like a sense of blackness behind you or around you. Like there is some sort of dark void, like a movie theater, and then a sort of screen appearing somewhere in front of you or in the middle of you or wherever it happens to appear for you, where these internal images seem to be playing. This might not be the case for everybody. But see if that's something you experience or if you experience something different. Everybody is a little unique in this regard. Regardless, just notice how you experience visual sensations and how it is that it feels like those visual images are happening inside of the body or inside of your awareness. If you pull to mind an image of a landscape, notice how big that image is. Does it feel like it's showing up on a small screen? Or does it feel like it encompasses the entirety of your being? Incidentally, if a thought jumps in and tries to say that this is proof that you are in control of your thoughts because I asked you to visualize a landscape and you were able to do so, just notice that you didn't choose whether that landscape had mountains or rivers or trees or a sky, whether it was daylight or nighttime, what season was appearing in the landscape, were there animals, birds, humans? Was it a landscape in nature or was it a landscape in a city? Was it a suburban landscape? Were there buildings, houses, spaceships, aircraft? Did it look painted? Did it look photographic? Did it look sketched like a cartoon or a child's line drawing? You didn't choose any of those things. A suggestion was put out to picture a landscape, and unconscious processes did all the rest of the work. But afterwards, there was a thought that I made this happen. I chose to picture that landscape. But did you really? How much processing would it have taken for you to make every choice of every leaf or every droplet of rain, every snowflake that appeared in your imaginary landscape? Instead, it's all instantaneous and immediate and easy because you choose none of it. Just as we did with the auditory thought, keep an eye out for the next visual thought that appears. And before it does, see if you can guess what that image is going to be. Notice that the guessing of what the image might be might actually be another thought that produces that specific image. For instance, if I ask, what's my next thought going to be? And all of a sudden I see an image of a gopher. Well, that image of a gopher was the next thought. Did I predict that next thought? No, I didn't choose to predict a gopher. The mind simply offered up an image, and then identification can latch onto it and say, I'm choosing an image of a gopher. That's what I'm going to think next, or that's what I guess I'm going to think next. And then you might find, because you've already had that first thought, that a second gopher thought appears. You will probably also find that much of the thinking that you will acknowledge, both in terms of auditory and visual sensations, are replays of things that we have heard throughout the day or seen throughout the day, or in some way reflected from things that we have come in contact with in recent hours. So that next thought is conditioned by all of the experiences that came before it, particularly those that are most recent. So if the thoughts are conditioned, again, they cannot be your doing. If the thoughts are not chosen, they are not your doing. And again, like we did with the auditory thoughts, notice that next visual image that appears in the mind. Where does it come from? How does it appear? Is it abrupt, instantly formed, or does it seem to fade in from someplace else? When the image has appeared, does it feel solid? Does it feel as real as a table in front of you? Does it seem two-dimensional or three-dimensional? Do you seem to be a part of that thought, a part of that image, or do you seem to be viewing it from a distance? If it feels like you're viewing it either from within the image or at a distance, like we did with sounds, can you try to identify where the looker or the seer is currently located? Is the feeling of being a seer located in a physical sensation? Or again, is there a secondary mental visual image which seems to be creating a false sense of distance between the appearance of the image and something which is felt to be seeing it? And like we did with the oral auditory sensations, notice when that visual image disappears next. Where does it go? Does it immediately disappear or does it dissolve? With visual sensations, you might even notice that one seems to blend seamlessly into the next, like you're watching a movie with some form of crossfading, scene to scene, thought to thought, barely related image to barely related image. And as that image perhaps disappears, if you feel any association with the image, notice if you dissolve along with it, or does it dissolve into some sort of empty, unknowable space? And if so, what does that indicate about your relationship to that thought? Of course, we also have thoughts which can manifest in the sensory fields of smell or taste or touch. But they're not quite as prevalent as seeing and hearing thoughts. So we won't directly explore those today. But on your own, at some other point, if you would like to, they can also yield very interesting insights. And throughout the day, it can be very helpful, especially when you seem to be lost on that runaway train of thinking, to notice whether you are writing the thoughts, if you are the thoughts, if you can even be found as a watcher a hearer or a seer of those thoughts, or if everything is simply arising and passing and arising and passing over and over entirely on its own, with no you in the process. And if you get on tangents where you notice a lot of self-critical or ruminative thinking, spirals of negativity or depression or criticism or judgment, see if you can step back and simply hear the sounds of those thoughts without paying attention to the content, especially without identifying with the content of those thoughts. Always remember that a thought can be heard as melody, a thought can be heard as texture, a thought can be heard just like somebody speaking a language which you don't understand. Thoughts can be heard like bird song or whale song. Even the most self-critical, self-hating, judgmental thoughts, if heard simply as a sort of instrumental music, can be quite beautiful. So we're not pushing away any thoughts. We're not judging thoughts or choosing thoughts above others. We're simply getting perspective on the fact that thoughts are simply sound. Thoughts are simply images. A thought may be a beautiful sunset, or a thought may be a pile of rotting trash on a street corner. But the actual thought itself is simply shape and color, and any connotations and judgment and label is yet a secondary thought placed on top of the raw experience. So at any time throughout the day, we can come back to the raw experience of thought, where they simply arise and pass on their own, like beautiful music, like beautiful images, abstract, unnameable, ungraspable, but absolutely, absolutely fine, absolutely neutral, absolutely free from identity or personal attachment. And when those thoughts are liberated, contentless, free from attachment or identification, notice if there is any seer or hearer or permanent self who is still there to acknowledge this. Notice if only for a moment that sense of a self has disappeared along with the identification to thinking. If your eyes are closed or even partially lidded, gradually take a moment to come back to the body and back to the breath, back to sounds in the room, back to the feeling of your feet or body on the chair. And then in your own time, slowly feel free to move around and open your eyes.